All right. Well, first I just want to say thank you for coming to Groundbreak 2022. Just curious, who here, is this your first time at Groundbreak? Wow, that's a lot. Mine as well. So I'm a recent addition here at Procore, so mine too. It's been a really, everybody go to the hat bar, by the way. Like, that is like the coolest thing I think I've ever seen at a conference before. So if you haven't checked that out, go to the hat bar, get yourself a free hat out in the expo hall. So thank you for coming to this session. So we're going to talk today about how technology can help you solve challenges that we're facing right now in the industry with labor and material shortages. So just do a quick introduction of your speakers today. So my name is Brian Davis. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at Procore. A little bit about myself. So like many of you, I grew up in construction. My dad was a contractor, and I grew up, did marketing and business development. Joining me is Steve Jones, and Steve is very well known throughout the industry. He speaks at a lot of events and conferences such as these. He is a senior director for the industry insights at Dodge Data and Analytics. Steve has a background in architecture and has served on board of directors for different companies in his past as well. So we're very grateful that he could join us here today. So before we kind of jump into things, I want to speak a little bit to Procore's vision. And I know many of you have seen this quoted during today's conference and have seen this in the past as you've interacted with Procore, but it truly is to improve the lives of everyone in construction. And there's a number of different ways that we do that. And one of the things, especially relevant for this group, that I'd like to touch on is when we say everyone in construction, we absolutely, and of course, mean specialty contractors. And towards the end of 2021, we looked at what we were doing for specialty contractors, and we realized that we wanted to know more. We wanted to understand on a deeper level the pains and the challenges and the struggles that people were having, not just within Procore, but across the whole industry and really across the whole globe. So we made a decision to partner with Steve and his team over at Dodge. And we came to Steve and said, you know, this is what we want to do. We really want to dig in deep and find out what are the things that are keeping folks up at night in the trades. What are the pain points and the challenges and the trials that they're facing, and how can we really find out some good, solid research and evidence of what that looks like? So we decided to put together a survey that would go out across the globe and across multiple different trades. So there was a lot of things that we learned from this survey, and I'm not going to take any thunder from Steve. He's going to go into a lot more detail on what we learned, but I did want to share just a couple of things that stood out to us here at Procore. And you've heard this report already referenced a few different times during Groundbreak. It was referenced in the keynote, and then during the specialty contractor keynote, we referenced it a few times as well. But one of the things, and this is a common thing we're hearing, and I know that for those of us that have been in the industry for a while, we know that this issue of the labor shortage, it isn't anything new. I mean, this is something that we've actually been struggling with for quite a while, certainly a lot longer than the last couple of years when it's really been getting a lot of focus and attention. But something that was really important that we learned from this survey was when you look at this statistic here that trade contractors are reporting that on average 32% of their current workforce is expected to retire in the next 5 years. It really tells us that, you know, this labor shortage we're talking about and that we're trying to solve, you know, for these problems and come up with solutions for, it's good that we're focusing on this because it's not going away. And when you look at even some trades like electrical contractors, you know, they're going to be hit really hard from this wave of retirees. And so this is something that we're taking very seriously and how we can help you all be productive with the teams that you do have. The other thing that we got a lot of research and insight into was the continued reliance on manual systems. So your whiteboards, your spreadsheets, your phone calls, the yellow notepads. And of course, this kind of lies at the core of what we aim to solve here for you all at Procore, is how can we help people get into more automated systems and connect their teams in better and stronger ways. And there's a lot of other insights that we develop beyond just this 39% that are reporting they're still heavily relying on these tools. But this is something that we've always suspected and we've observed, but it was really interesting to start to have some real data behind it so we could really start to frame the challenge to tackle in a really accurate way. And then the last thing that I'll touch on before I hand it over to Steve, and he's really going to get into some really detailed and really interesting areas of this report, is our cash flow challenges. And for those of you that went to Will Lehrman's keynote earlier this morning, he referenced this in there as well, that there are two big things that are really hurting when it comes to cash flow. The first one is, of course, the material challenges that are being faced today, with 42% reporting that this is a top cause of margin loss on their projects. And then, of course, the other side of it, 73% are reporting that on average it's taking over 60 days for them to receive payment. And so this cash flow challenge is really putting a lot of strain and a lot of pressure on especially contractors. And again, you see here in the expo hall and across the various breakouts, project financials is a big focus for us at Procore, and it's having data and research like this that's really helping us surgically understand where to focus. So, last thing that I'll share before I hand it over to Steve, and I'm going to talk a little more slowly on this slide to give you a chance to get your phone out and snap a photo of this. This will take you to a link where you can download the report. If you don't get a chance to snap it, I will put this slide back up at the end of the presentation so that you can download that report. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for staying with us today. I'm Steve Jones. I've been in this industry my whole career, too. Don't add up those numbers. It's a big number. Anyway, I've seen it from many different sides, and I've been here with Dodge for about 20 years now doing research. We're the biggest industry on the planet Earth by a long measure. But we are so fragmented, it's very difficult to know what's going on outside your own yard. That's why conferences like this are so important, right? And the work that we try and do is to go out and study what are people doing, what's actually providing value that then you can use in your own shop. We've got reports, they're all free up at that URL on construction.com, and this is one of them, but the theme is always, what is it that's actually producing value here? What are people doing that others can take advantage of? And so we dug into that with this particular report that we just finished for Procore. We did 537 specialty contractors in the 4 trades that you see here: mechanical, electrical, plumbing, steel, and concrete. We dug into issues of profitability, issues around workforce, and then how technology is hopefully tying that together and improving those things. And we did it around the world. So I'll share with you just some of the highlights of that today, but please, you can use that Q code there, download the report, and you can see it in depth. So around profitability, first thing we wanted to do is establish kind of where we are among those 5 trades in terms of profit margins. All right, you all know what your own profit margin is, so you can kind of find yourself here in this. You can see the average was 21%. People above that there, the 21 to 30s, and then the more than 30s, it gets pretty thin up there. Steel contractors have the most up there, but there's an awful lot that are operating below, and concrete contractors are the ones who are really struggling with that low margin. 36% of them say that they're making 10% or less, all right? And that, among that, it's 10% across the whole, a third of those concrete contractors there, but it's 10% average across all the contractors. It tends to be the smaller firms. 20% of them, or 30, it's just tougher, all right? And there's a ton of these different erosion factors at work, right? You've got all kinds of materials uncertainty. You've got labor shortages. You've got field to office communications are an issue. You've got unbillable changes. You've got payment durations. You've got rework, right? All digging away at that profit margin. And so we tried to unpack some of that and find out where we are with it. And so we asked people, look, what are the factors, to what degree are each of these factors eroding your profit? And as you can see here, that materials is number 1 and lack of skilled labor number 2. And they go down the line all the way into inefficient procurement processes, right? If you just pull out those materials ones, they're pretty profound, right? We are, as most of you are living and know every day, we are in absolutely uncharted waters right now as an economy as it relates to construction inflation, right? We do a report with civil contractors every quarter where we take their temperature on their business conditions. This is how many are telling us that they have these fluctuation of cost materials are impacting their projects, right? Everybody's feeling this. And this is where they're seeing it the most. Pipe, steel, pavement, concrete, aggregates. I mean, this is the core materials that we need for this industry, right? This is a real serious struggle right now. And it's interesting when we break out by the size of the companies, because we did companies that are in that 2 to 10 million range. We did the medium size, 10 to 50 million, and then the large companies over 50 million. The smaller companies were the ones who were suffering most from that material shortages. But interestingly, and this was surprising to me, that the ones who were complaining the most about their own inefficient procurement were the larger companies. So it may be just that bureaucracy of larger companies who simply makes those processes more sluggish inside their own organizations, but that was a really interesting finding. We also wanted to know at what frequency are you actually able to then pass on any of these cost increases, right, to your owner? And these are the number of people who can't do it. And the green is the number of people who can't do it half the time, right? So not only are you faced with these cost increases that you don't control, huge numbers of people just have to eat those. And by company size, that is whacking the larger companies actually much more so than it is the smaller companies. So we asked people, what are you doing, right, in order to deal with the limited shipping, the trucking, the supply chain constraints? Number one was raising prices. I don't want to ask for a show of hands. I'm not going to do that and put you on the spot. But your peers are saying all over the world, that's the number one thing they're planning to do, right? Because they've got to cover themselves. But they're also doing other things, other tactics here, suggesting more alternate products, right, that they know they have some confidence they can get, increasing the number of the suppliers that they're dealing with, putting more of your capital into owning your own inventories, right? So you don't have to worry that you can get it on short notice. You've got it in the yard. Dealing directly with the manufacturers as opposed to going through distributors. I think that is a really interesting trend, and that may actually, persist through this. And then lastly, we got people saying, I'm just turning work down. And a fairly large number there. Not so much with the concrete players, but really strong with the steel players. They're in such a volatile space. They're just turning the work down. That doesn't help get any of the work done that needs to get done, does it? So, looking at what we learned about labor productivity and labor shortages, back to that list of the things which are impacting people's erosion, you see lack of labor, the overtime you got to pay, labor productivity challenges, and inaccurate labor planning and allocation, right, which is where a tool like Procore comes in. So right now, the job openings are falling a little bit, but still, they're at historic highs generally. The percentage of specialty contractors reporting that 50% or more of their projects are being negatively impacted because they can't get people. And you can see this is happening all over the world. It's worse actually in Canada and Australia than it is here. We should be happy about that. But the steel folks are the ones who are really getting creamed by this. So the percentage of contractors who are saying that they're suffering each of these particular problems, right? Project delays. And the green is how many said, yeah, I'm suffering from that. And then the nice thing about doing an electronic survey like that is whatever you pick that you're actually suffering from, we show it to you again. We go, what's the worst thing? What's the number one worst thing? And that's the blue line, right? And so that really around project delays is not only the longest green line, it's the longest blue line. I mean, that's what's really suffering here. And then you get project costs, the ability to respond to future bids, right? That ties back to, I think I'm not even going to bid this job because I don't know that I can get the steel, the concrete, the electrical conduit, whatever it is I'm suffering with here. Worker health and safety suffers, quality suffers, and more rework. And I'll get to rework in a minute because that's an ugly story in and of itself. This aging out that you heard about this morning and that Brian referenced. You got a lot of people likely to retire in the next 5 years, right? When you take a look at that by trade, you can see the electrical is the ones who are getting hit the hardest, reporting that they have the most number of people who are likely to retire. Doesn't mean they will retire, because you'll see in a minute what they're doing, which is begging people to stay. But you know, the story here just on paper is not a good one. And the larger companies are the ones who are facing much worse of that. We also looked into the idea of productivity, right? How much of your time is spent on low productivity administrative tasks? You heard that talked about this morning. You can see here how the dotted line at the bottom is just the average that people reported was 20. So these are just the people who are, how many people are above the average, right? It gets really ugly in electrical. And we did the same thing, cutting it here with company size. You can see this is definitely much more of a big company problem. And again, I think that supports this idea of kind of bureaucracy and complexity that you get into. The size of your organization makes it harder just to function within it. So what are people doing to try and counter these negative impacts of a labor shortage? We looked at two different things, two different aspects. These are ones which are kind of personnel related, and you can see increasing those retention efforts. I think there's going to be a lot of discussions with people in their 60s about what would it take to keep you here, right? I think there's a lot of those conversations going to be going on. And then finding and recruiting. But where are they going to come from? That's the challenge. Increased use of overtime. That's what you then end up with, right? And that is not a scalable solution, right? And then the additional use of temporary labor services, but then you have to worry about quality issues and everything else, because that's not your own people, right? And so, and it varies here across the size of the companies, but you see the larger companies are leaning more towards doing almost all of these things, because they're the ones who are facing the most impact from this. We also looked at what we call just strategy related. Number one, at the top, we've got to bring technology in to our organization that helps us to do more with the resources that we already have, right? How can we apply technology to productivity? So that's going to be probably metric number one with any company looking to add technology is this going to help me get more work out of the resources I have, because I know I can't add to them. And then after that, the use of increased offsite and prefab. And Dodge, we've done a bunch of studies on that. We do one every year on that. And you really can increase the productivity in terms of the dollar value installed in place by using offsite techniques of prefab and modularization. There's a lot to that. So I wasn't surprised to see that come up. More strategic partnerships with other contractors. That's very interesting. So something for you to think about, because this is what your peers are thinking about. And then the use of more job site automation, all right? Another thing that we wanted to try and find out to what degree is this impacting you is how good are you at connecting your field and your office, right? Because that is traditionally somewhat of a divide, right? And that was named as one of those top things eroding profits, right, is that we don't have good field to office communications. And so when we ask folks, what is it that's behind that? You can see the top three here all kind of relate, because that lack of technology or mobile tools to streamline those communications, if you had those, that's actually going to, by its nature, it's going to bring standardization to that method of communication, and it's going to shorten the time, right? So you'll kind of take care of the top three by taking care of that third one. Payment periods, you heard it referenced this morning. We wanted to find out how long does it take you to get paid from the time you issue an invoice, right? So here you see that whole spread, right? From the people getting paid in 1 to 10 days, 4% of those, God bless them, I don't know how they're making that happen, all the way out to over 90 days, right? Average 48 days. I mean, trade contractors are essentially financing this industry. I mean, I work for a big company, and we don't put up with anybody paying us in less than 30 days. I mean, my God. And the average is 48? This is crazy. So anything you can do to speed that up And when we ask people, what do you think can be done non-confrontationally, right? You don't send an army of lawyers in. What can you do non-confrontationally? And they basically said better software and technology came out first, and then automated processes, which again ties directly to then having better software and technology came out as the top ways to try and address it. So again, I think Procore is moving in the right direction with this. And we unpacked some stuff around rework and unbillable changes. The percentage of margin erosion that's caused by rework. Now this is, everybody's experiencing some level of erosion, right? How much of that erosion can you tie back to be a root cause because of rework? Concrete folks were actually the best in that, but the steel guys were really the worst. I mean, this is high. More than 60% of that margin loss can be tied to the fact that they had unplanned rework. Whew. But all those dark blue numbers, this is an ugly story of what unplanned rework is doing to people's profits out there. And then why are you having? If you can get back to what that root cause of that unplanned rework was, all right, what are the frequencies for you? And poor communication, number one. Poor planning and management, number two, which is something that technology can definitely address, right? Poor communication among team members, which again you heard this morning, right, is the direction that Procore is definitely pursuing. Errors by suppliers, poor multi-trade coordination, lack of training for the craft labor, outdated drawings, and then poor change management processes, which again can be instituted with a technology approach. All right, and it varies, as you see, across the trades, but there's fairly good unanimity there on those top ones. Everybody's suffering from that. So the percentage of the revenue lost to change orders that you can't invoice. All right, so if you're doing a $10 million job, what percentage of that revenue could you say basically is you have given up because you had to eat a change order? All right, this was shockingly bad. And here, again, it's the larger companies that are suffering even more so than the smaller companies, which was counterintuitive, again, to the way I tend to think, well, they're a big company because they've got all these great organized systems in place and they're really able to execute efficiently. And it turns out that what we're seeing in the data consistently is that's kind of the opposite. Right? And the smaller, more nimble companies are actually able to respond to conditions and deal with things better. The larger companies are the ones who seem to be suffering from an awful lot of these things, more so. So in terms of technology solutions, we want to know across all these trade contractors, where are you in terms of the types of tools you're using to try and address all these problems that we've been talking about, right? Well, as it turns out, about 61% here are using some kind of software solution, whether it's commercially available software or whether it's something that they built themselves or they took a generic tool of some kind and took Excel and put it in the laboratory and made it dance and do certain things. That's pretty good. Could be a heck of a lot better, I think. But the fact that you still have 19% saying, well, we don't even really use technology. We're just, we've got a lot of great paper forms that work for us, and we're getting together around a whiteboard and stuff. It's like, there's work to do here, right? And then, there's a lot of folks who are basically just still working with Excel because Excel's great, but it's not as good as really well-integrated software that has specific construction workflows in it, right? You've got to really work it to make it dance the way you want to. When we ask folks, all right, among that 61% who say that you're using one of those types of software, pre-construction, project execution, or construction analysis, you can see there's still really a lot of variety between the various trades. And the steel folks are the ones who seem to be the most advanced in this and the most committed to it, all right? Mechanical, actually surprisingly to me, because I think of mechanical contractors, I've done a lot of BIM study, and they were an early adopter of BIM, so I kind of just translated that into probably a more technologically advanced approach, but it ain't so. And so I learned. I learn every time I do these things. So we also asked about financial management, right? A little bit better, 63% are using some kind of commercial, or else they've got something that's purpose-built, either by them or something that they purposely turned into something. The rest are still just using either spreadsheets or no tech at all. That 63%, again, it varies a lot. And here I was kind of surprised that the concrete folks were the leaders in that. But again, the mechanical folks were then surprisingly to me at the back end of that. We asked about workforce management, right? As you heard this morning, this is going to be a major thrust coming now for Procore. That was a little bit lower overall. 55% are using either commercially available or something that's been specifically developed for that. And here the steel folks are the ones who are the strongest. The concrete, here's where they come in the lowest. And then the percentage of contractors implementing things for safety. We do a big safety report every 2 years. Anytime we do any of our research studies, I'm always jamming in questions about safety. How is BIM helping safety? How is project delivery systems helping safety? How is lean helping safety? I'm always looking for what is going to be giving a lift to safety. It's just part of how we go to market on this. So we asked about this. I was actually really, really encouraged. You see a little bit more here on the large companies than on the small companies, but you're saying yes. When we ask specifically for safety, are you using site cameras and drones? Do you have sensors out there? Do you have wearables on people? Are you using AI and machine learning to analyze these images that you're pulling in off of your site cameras and things? All right, we were really jazzed to see that that's actually getting a lot of good traction here. This is one of the happiest things in the findings for me. But we also had to ask the question, what are you still basically mostly using manual methods for? And I mean, it's across the board. We were hoping maybe we'd find, well, there's 3 or 4 things that are really kind of the slow points here. But it's a long list of things that people are that a fairly large number of folks here are still basically just doing in a manual way, all the way through the process. And then we said, all right, so why? What is hard for you about taking technology, you know it exists, right? Bringing it into your organization and applying it to these workflows that would clearly benefit from it, all right? And, yeah, okay, too much training is required. All right, resistance from my field staff. Now, that one's interesting because when we first started doing these technology studies about 15 years ago, it was the C-suite that said, oh, we don't need that stuff. And it was the field that was calling for it. Now that has shifted 100%. There is no senior executive of any construction company anywhere who isn't throwing money at technology. We heard it today. There's a ton of technology being bought. The problem is it's not always being bought with the user in mind. And it's not always being bought by the people who end up having to really go out and use it tomorrow on a muddy job site, right? And the pushback now that we're seeing in every study that we do is it's coming back from the field going, dude, you've bought 3 pieces of crap on me in the last 3 years. I don't want to hear about another one, right? What makes me think this one's going to be any better? And this is the 11th tool you've given me today, right? Come on. All right, so in a sense, I'm not really surprised that this came out where it is because we're seeing that with lots of different things. Dude, I don't have time to evaluate the options. And that's very real. I have a good friend with Hill Mechanical, if you've heard of them in the Chicago area. He's their head of VDC. He says, man, I could spend every minute of every day just looking at the tech that's available to me. I mean, you walk around downstairs, right? It'd take you a solid day just to even understand what's at every one of those booths, and that's just a fraction of what's out there. And in some ways, there's too much tech kind of flooding the market, and lots of these little isolated rifle shot point solution type things, right? And so they just say, look, I just don't have time to think, and unfortunately, then it just kind of shuts you down, overall. And then the lack of internal capability, even if we did bring something in to implement it, manage it, pilot it, roll it out, or scale it, all the thing, that's a different set of skills, right? And all those are probably, frankly, made worse by the fact that we've got this labor shortage and nobody has time to even get the work that they have to get done, much less do all these other things to try and hopefully maybe improve in the future. I was pleased to see that some of these lower ones actually didn't score as high as they could have, and I was happy to see that that lack of senior management support has gone away now. Like I said, when we first started doing these studies 10, 12 years ago, that was way up there. It was like, I don't know about this stuff. Now they all want that stuff, so that's gone away. I was also really happy to see, you got to give people the opportunity to say, you know, that paper way we do it is actually better. Very few people are saying that, thankfully, right? And very few people are saying that we don't do this because the tech's too hard to use. That used to score very high, right? So these three things that used to score kind of high in our earlier days of tracking this stuff have now all fallen down. Those are all good, right? But the stuff we have still up at the top, it's got to get dealt with. So with that, I think we've got 5 more minutes, all right? Any kind of questions you have, Brian's going to come up here and put that QR code up here again so that we can, you want me to just run back to that? Yeah. To the downloadable. Because this has, you know, this is just, I drove you through the neighborhood and showed you some of the houses, but you can download the report and you'll see more depth on all of this, on all these topics. You know, but these findings in general are much like the findings that we're getting from looking at lots of these sorts of technology and process adoptions. The resistances are kind of similar. The benefits are right there, but in a sense, there has to be the proof coming down from those who are buying this to the people who are actually hands-on using it, that yeah, this is a really important solution and it works well with the other stuff that we already have. Right? It's not one more thing you got to stop and learn independently on its own that doesn't even talk to anything else, right? Those days have got to be over at this point. So anybody have any thoughts, questions? Does this align with what is happening in your companies? Is there any differences in what's happening with your companies or what you're perceiving? Yeah.
Question. What was the date of the study?
We just finished it, what, 3 months ago, I think? Yeah, so it's definitely a this year study. Yeah. All right, well, with that, I'll give you 2 minutes back in your day. Thank you.